friend of mine with some psychology coursework. She's got to do an essay compare and contrasting the phenomena of depression from different psychological perspectives. Okay. And she's chosen to do compare and contrast behaviorist, humanist, psychodynamic, and biopsychology. Mm-hmm. Are there any good sort of things that spring to your mind that with this?
Well, the whole thing about depression, if we're talking about like a major depressive disorder, I would go and first try to go into the biological stance and see what's going on in the brain when it comes to, serotonin lows. However, if you want to go into a psychological aspect of it, regardless of what it is basically ways of thinking and the ways of, let's say, how to use language to describe your perception. Let's say, for example, as a behavior approach to what I know, like if you say, like, this always happens to me, this should happen. Things like that to actually contribute to the feelings of, let's say, worthlessness and things of that nature, because it could be something conditioned within a person's language. So I would go with a behaviorist perspective because I think it's more practical. And that's just my 2 cents on it.
So sorry, just the behaviorist thing, and sorry, how would you come with it from the behaviorist thing as a kind of as a result of sort of the failing of operant conditioning to some degree?
No, not in that sense. I'm thinking in the terms of verbal behavior of how you actually speak to yourself and how you kind of operate in the environment. And the way, it could be operant conditioning because it could be reinforcing to the feeling of, let's say, depression and downness. But also you have to keep in mind that these things has a biological component when we're talking about serotonin levels and inactivity.
But obviously the way you talk to yourself can influence your serotonin levels, I do believe, can't it?
I believe so, yeah, definitely. It can. Because what you're doing is just you're keeping yourself in that state. And there could be so many other reasons why people do that, but the main thing is that it's really about language and how you actually perceive the outside world. There are people who will say words like should, always, like this stressful language, and then you actually change your perception of how you see reality. Hence, it's a lot of things has to do with the way you actually speak. So that could actually be learned. It's a learned behavior, but it could be relearned in the sense that, all right, instead of using these words, this is what you're going to use. And then you become conditioned to use other words, and the words like should, always, and things that supposedly are negative, hence reinforcing your depression. And that's more of a behaviorist perspective. Yeah. And I found that type of therapy more useful in later, sessions with people. Not towards the beginning of the stages. Of course, there's an opportunity to listen to the person's situation, but the main thing I'm looking for is patterns of language and see how you basically feel afterwards. But, there's things that you could actually do to actually relieve depression. There's one thing is just going outside and taking a walk or breathing exercises or to exercise itself. These things actually contribute to not occurring with depressive states as much as you used to.
Mm-hmm.
There's medications, but I think those options should be explored first.
So you don't like the medication, or you think it's a last resort, or what?
I think it's a later resort. I don't think there's when we're talking about depression, I think the option to take medication first, I think it's may not be needed. It actually was a situation. I think you have to have options of even people, even if you talk about it, it's an actual relief of being depressed. Because remember, when we talk about depression, we're talking about almost like a slowing down of energy. But this is the interesting thing about depression, is that depression itself, it's also viewed as a defense mechanism. Let's say if you was a person that always goes out, always parties, and sometimes within our body, we try to defend ourselves by not going out as much, because if you go out a lot, if you're out there so much, then you increase your mortality rate. This is one theory. So depression could also be used as something very natural. But the problem is when it becomes chronic. And when it actually hinders on your everyday function. That's when it becomes a problem. But yeah, I think depression itself, I think, is one of those easiest problem if you want to fix it. I think depression is, and a lot of times, and most times, depression is situational. And sometimes, it's okay to be sad. It's okay to feel somewhat depressed. It's just not something that you have to feel happy right away. I think it is helpful to have a person actually, let's say if they're grieving, to let them grieve, to let them feel sad. Because there's a movie called Inside Out. It shows a perfect example of that. Have you ever seen the animation movie? And this is for kids, but I think it went over a lot of kids' head. But this is an actual story about emotions. Okay. And how if you try to suppress a certain type of emotion, then it does the opposite effect of functioning, like things could go wrong. So it's not helpful to just escape from sadness or anger or things like, and trying to suppress those things, because they have a counter effect.
So it's just a small change in environment can do it.
Of course, yeah, definitely. For behaviors, everything is the environment. Even people, it's just the main thing is the environment. And you could manipulate your environment the other way. It could be helpful and it could be harmful.
Yeah.
I hope that answered some of your questions, Chaz.
It's given me a lot of stuff to chew on.
I'm reading an interesting book, and I definitely would recommend it. It's called Blink.
I take it you'll be getting is it the DSM-B or something like that?
5.
The DSM-5?
Yeah.
Which I haven't read the whole thing. I have it here on my computer, but
Well, it's not actually released yet. I know they've released some
Yes, it
things
is.
saying what some of the
Yeah.
changes are going to
It's
be in the
re- it's released.
DSM.
It's already there. It's out.
It's
Is
released.
it? Oh.
Yeah, it's out.
I've seen
What I
that.
was looking at was saying it wasn't out yet. It
Yeah.
must have been. I must have been looking at an
Well,
old site that came
they
up.
took a long time to get it out because there was a lot of research and changing of names and shit like that, and it had to be peer reviewed so many times.
I'm sure there was some stuff changed about the diagnosis of schizophrenia, I believe.
Yeah, and the structure has changed. There's no more like axis 1, 2, 3, or 4, or 5. They don't have that anymore.
Because funny enough, as part of the work, I had to look up something from the DSM-4, and obviously links to the DSM-5 sort of came up.
Yeah, DSM-4 comes in the DSM-4 reversion, and now the DSM-5 is out.
Yeah, I think the links that I saw, they were talking about the DSM-5, and they were saying the proposed changes that should be in there, but it was talking about it like it hadn't come out, so I thought it hadn't come out yet. So when did it actually come out?
Oh man, like a couple of years ago, I think.
Really? Oh, the websites I read must have been quite out of date then. Must have just been a link that's been clicked on a lot. That's why Google chucked it towards the top.
Yeah.
I mean, I've done most of the work to this essay. I've just got to get it up to sort of 2,000 words.
Mm-hmm.
What's ICD-10?
Depression is one of those easy things that there's so much information on it. So you can basically find anything on it.
Yeah, it's been published for like 2 years already, 2.5 years. You can put it on the side here.
And sometimes I don't think depression is a real diagnosis. I question that too.
Why you say that? What do you think it is instead?
Because I think it's a more conditioned thing, you know.
I think it's something very, very easily to misdiagnose. I think
I think you're right because
it's referred to as the common cold of psychiatric disorders.
Yeah, because it's always something that leads to a depression. It's not just the depression itself.
Yeah.
I mean, you could have a time where you're not sleeping very much, and you could exhibit signs of depression.
Mm-hmm.
But it's just a temporary state of, you know, malcognition, one night's sleep, and you're fine again, a good rest and recuperation.
Yeah.
By the way, depressed people, just like bipolar people, they're often very difficult to take their medication, aren't they?
No, I've been taking mine for like 12 years now without missing maybe 3 or 4, 5 or 6, whatever.
I just feel depression, like ADHD, is more of a symptom from another thing than an actual main thing.
I know, but I've got to talk from what they're teaching in A-level psychology.
Yeah.
I mean, I'd love to go into exposing those theories, but you know, that's not what they're looking for in the paperwork so much at this level.
No.
No, this is just regurgitate the information that's currently in the field.
And a lot of stuff that I was talking about depression and ways to go is really cognitive behavioral. Like, it's like one of the general type of talk therapy that people use, and it's been effective and has been. You know, I don't use it, but it is very similar to stuff that I do. But, you know, you're talking about cognition and you're talking about behavior.
Right. So is cognition something like past tense and behavior is kind of like a present tense?
Cognition is more of the mechanisms of the workings of the mind.
Yeah.
The way you think, the way you perceive, the way, they get into the black box theory, the unconscious. A lot of it is conceptual, but, from a lot of studies and things like that, has actually been very promising.
Yeah.
But I think it does work in the sense of how people talk to each other and how you kind of think about things. So I have no quarrels against it.
Any other questions?
No.
Well, what I'm fascinated is with autism. Like,
Autism?
oh man, it's an amazing thing to work with people who are autistic.
Yeah.
Find very fascinating. Yeah,
Well,
these are the people who actually lack the actually emotional intelligence that, they could watch a movie, but they kind of miss the cues of emotions of what's going on, and yet they could have every detail of the environment in pinpoint accuracy like no other.